that I have never been more fired up at the age of 66 than at this particular moment with Brother Bernie and each and every one of you in the campaign and the movement that we're trying to sustain. Oh, yes. Be very candid about that. Brother Stacey's right. There's something unprecedented in not just the campaign, but the movement as well as the leader. And it happens at one of the most dangerous moments in the history of this nation, the history of this democratic experiment, in the history of this empire. Let us be very, very clear. Let us not be deceived. That we're living in one of the most grim moments. Neo-fascism is real. Organized hatred is real. Losing sight of the humanity of poor people, no matter what color, of trans, of gays, of lesbians, of women, of indigenous peoples, of black peoples, of brown peoples, is very real. And to have a candidate who has the longevity of integrity and honesty and decency and courage. Now, I don't fetishize anybody. My dear Bernie Sanders is a human being like everybody else. He's a cracked vessel just like you and me. But he's a special brother. Oh, he's a unique cracked vessel, especially when it comes to electoral politics in the United States. So I want to just begin by laying out a very brief framework, say a quick word after, and then we'll sit down and have Socratic dialogue. But I want us to focus in on the 4 questions that the great W.B. Du Bois left us right before he died. You all know the great W.B. Du Bois, one of the greatest public intellectuals in the history of this nation. He said every generation raises the question, what does integrity do in the face of oppression? What does honesty do in the face of deception? What does decency do in the face of insult? And what does courage do in the face of brute force? Integrity, honesty, decency, courage. See, that is the moral and as a revolutionary Christian, I would say spiritual level that we have to sustain. That when you're talking about Bernie Sanders and his solidarity with poor and working people, when you're talking about Bernie Sanders and all of the various proposals and policies, in the end, you're talking about what does it mean to be a human being that's attempting to enact integrity, honesty, decency, and courage before the worms get our bodies. And see, democracies are very weak and fragile, and they tend not to last that long. And one of the reasons why they are so contingent is precisely because the people begin to run out of gas in terms of integrity and fall into cupidity and venality, love of money, power, domination, manipulation. Honesty degenerates into mendacity, lies every day, everywhere. Decency becomes subversive. Just to be a decent human being makes you damn near revolutionary. Because you have a deep care and concern for other people. You have a hypersensitivity to the suffering of other people. They don't have to look like you. They don't have to have your same religion or sexual orientation. They don't have to have the same history in terms of their ethnicity. They're human beings, and you're concerned about them, and it puts you on the love train. Bernie Sanders' campaign is a love train. That's what it is. It's a love train. And because justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. And you see, I come from a people, a black people for 400 years, terrorized, traumatized, and hated. But at our best, we done taught America and the world something about love. I could just turn on John Coltrane's A Love Supreme right now and sit down A Stevie Wonder's Love and the Need of Love, a Toni Morrison's Beloved, a James Baldwin's Love-Soaked Essays, a Martin Luther King Jr.'s Witness of Love, a Fannie Lou Hamer's work of love. We're talking about something concrete, embodied, enacted. And it has less to do with skin pigmentation. It has to do with how you use whatever your skin pigmentation is to your moral and spiritual formation as the kind of human being you choose to be. And that's why when Brother Bernie says, it's not me, it's us. See, that's democratic. It's like the Negro National Anthem, lift every voice, not echo. The echo chamber, extension of the echo chamber, you're still in your silo. You're not entering public space the way John Dewey taught us in Democracy and Education, to enter that public space without humiliation and find your voice, just like your fingerprint. And bring those voices together in such a way that you can represent the best, not of black folk, brown folk, women, gays, lesbians, Jews, Arabs, Muslims, the best of the human project. And yes, our humanity comes couched in different races and ethnicities and genders and so forth. And white supremacy is real. Male supremacy is real. Hatred of Jews and Arabs and Muslims and Mexicans are real, but we're keeping it at that deep human level. And here comes this secular Jewish brother from Gut Bucket, Brooklyn, named Bernie Sanders, that says, lo and behold, I want a humanistic project too. Who wants to come with me and engage in a democratic awakening of a country that seems to be losing its mind and certainly losing its integrity, honesty, decency, and courage? That's what this campaign at its deepest level is about. And that's one of the reasons why we have a chance to win, because for the first time, Brother Stacey is right. It's so rare that you can get this kind of multiracial, multi-gender, multi-religious coalition together that focuses on something bigger than each and every one of us, which has to do both with the values but also with the children in the future. It has to do with the afterlife of the elders who are gone, so we can put a smile on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's face, a smile on Martin Luther King's face, a smile on Edward Said's face, a smile on Dorothy Day's face, a smile on all of those who came before, who bequeathed to us the best of integrity, honesty, decency, and courage. That's why we're here. And in that sense, we've already in part won. But in the end, we go into the White House. Oh, yeah. That's going to be an extension of our coming together. The prefigurative victory with a victory in the White House. And then we can turn the country around. Thank you all so very much.
You're gonna have to. There we go. That was incredible. This is gonna be a lot of fun. I'm gonna have to read to you my questions.
Oh, no, you do it any way you like.
I don't
way you like, my brother.
I don't want to screw this up.
It's impossible for you to screw it up.
My introduction to you and your work was by way of your book, Race Matters, published in 1993. The book addresses moral authority and racial debates concerning skin color in the United States. It questions matters of economics and politics, as well as other ethical issues, among other pertinent issues. The book was certainly relevant then, and I would venture a guess that it's relevant now. But in your words, Dr. West, tell me, does race still matter in the United States and in the world?
Oh, indeed, indeed. There's a number of different evils that we all have to come to terms with. White supremacy is an evil. Male supremacy is an evil. Anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Jewish hatred, anti-Mexican hatred. Homophobia to me is an evil. Transphobia is an evil. Any ideology that loses sight of the humanity of people and views them just as objects to be dominated and subjects to be exploited, is a form of evil. And so is white supremacy a particular evil that matters in the world? Absolutely. I get my death threats all the time. Let me know that it's still very much alive in its most vicious form, the white supremacist militia. That's the most vicious form. But there's other less vicious forms that are more covert, that are still operating. But the challenge is always never to fetishize race. And this is part of my struggle with some of my younger brothers and sisters who become oftentimes so obsessed with the power of anti-blackness that they don't situate it within context of the economy. There's no such thing as white supremacy in the modern world without its link to predatory capitalism and imperial expansion. See what I mean? There's no such thing as white supremacy not tied to male supremacy because there's black sisters who are a majority of black people. Black working people are constitutive of black community. So you must talk about class. You must talk about transphobia. So that some people call it intersectionality. My dear sister Kimberly Crenshaw coined that many years ago, and she's a towering legal theorist. But it's just a way of saying these things are sedimented and entangled. So you can't just talk about anti-blackness as if it floats above history and only zeroes in on these particular peoples, black peoples. It is intense, it is disproportionate, but it's connected to class, it's connected to gender, it's connected to empire, you see. And that honesty, intellectual integrity, intellectual honesty, just telling the truth and then seeing how we come to terms with the truth. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. Everybody's suffering. But the beautiful thing, too, is there's no such thing as race or white supremacy without struggles against white supremacy. There's no structure of domination ever without some resistance and resilience. And this is true for the vanilla side of town. And this is very important because a lot of people think when they talk about race, oh, it's those people of color over there catching hell. That's their interest group and constituency, and they're concerned about their interests. No, no, no. Integrity, honesty, decency, courage means to be a decent person is to be in solidarity with anybody who suffers. Anybody who suffers. You see? And solidarity is not the same thing as just being an ally, you see, in that sense, you see. So the crucial thing is that when we think of issues of race or identity, we should always raise the question, what is the moral content of your identity, and what are the political consequences of it? And it's never going to be just a question of color, gender, sexual orientation, and so forth. And the history of white brothers and sisters struggling against white supremacy is something that needs to be lifted. There's always been a significant slice of vanilla brothers and sisters struggling against white supremacy. Now, they've had a lot of cousins. We know that. A whole lot of them. And it made Thanksgiving dinner very, very difficult. When you come, oh, you one of those associated with those poor people, that trade union, those black folk, that women. Oh, yes, I'm trying to be a decent person. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's real. I learned it in church, learned it in synagogue, I learned it in the temple, I learned it in the trade union, I learned that trying to be decent, trying to be a moral human being, but it means you're going to be over against the dominant orientations in that way. And so when we have a moment in which this analysis can actually take on flesh, that's what social motion, social momentum, and social movements do. They take on the flesh of a vision and analysis of people who are willing to pay a cost. And of course, as you know, to be part of any love train, let alone Brother Bernie's love train, you got to be willing to be thoroughly misunderstood. misconstrued. Isn't that you all experience that? Do you experience that? It's just true. And you say, no, that's not what's going on in the Bernie camp. No, not at all. We're not perfect. We're human beings, but we have a commitment to integrity. And I will ask anybody in this particular historical moment, a politician who has a longer record of integrity, or what Jane Austen called consistency. People say, oh, he says the same thing all the time. That's called consistency. If corporate greed is out of control, and he's been saying it for 40 years, it's been out of control for 40 years, why is that something negative? Why don't he come up with something new? Well, what do you want him to say? Corporate greed is wonderful? He changed his mind. Consistency. And that's what we do have in our candidate. And, we're not here to put down other candidates, but none of those other folk come close to Bernie's longevity of consistency. Oh, that's yours. Yeah, that's right. That's my water. Thanks so much. It's just a fact.
Thank you for that lesson, and I'll just...
and grabbing your water, too.
Just jump over the next 6 questions I had prepared. You addressed a lot of those here. So a lot of Americans, and even some Democrats, they hear words like socialism and Marxism, and they become paralyzed with fear. And when they look at European electoral systems and they hear terms like social democrat, it's paralyzing. So, obviously there's a history to this, but tell us why you think this is, and tell us why we shouldn't be afraid of a little democratic socialism here in America.
Yeah, one is that anytime we engage in dialogue with fellow citizens or fellow human beings, for me, you always engage in what one could call loosely an immanent critique, which is to try to put yourself inside of their skin and view the world through their lens and get a sense of why they are so wrong. It's true. So you say they're social. Oh, the Soviet Union. Oh, you're absolutely right. The Soviet Union did, in fact, talk about socialism and ended up repressing and regimenting its population and engaged them in collectivization of the kulaks and mass murder. And Stalin was a gangster. Oh, so you agree with me? Uh-huh. That's right. I said, that's part of the failure of that particular communist experiment. There were some wonderful people who were a part of it early on, but it got hijacked. That's not what I mean by democratic socialism. Oh, really? I said, that's exactly right. I said, do you say the Pledge of Allegiance? Yes. Oh, that was written by democratic socialists. Really? Or do you like that song, Oh, Beautiful for Spacious Skies? That was written by democratic socialists. Sister Elizabeth Wellesley. Francis Harper wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. Did you know Martin Luther King Jr.? Oh, I love Martin Luther King Jr. He's my favorite. Did you know he's a democratic socialist? Oh. Oh, Helen Keller. Oh, Helen Keller was my great inspiration when I was in junior high. She was a democratic socialist. Oh. The greatest poet in 19th century America, Walt Whitman. Oh, he changed my life. I'm a poet. He's a democratic socialist. John Dewey, the greatest American philosopher in the history of the empire, democratic socialist. Ooh. Oh, it begins to look as American as apple pie. Why has it been suppressed? Why have their identities been severed from who they are? What do you think about Albert Einstein? He's the one that really exemplifies the highest level of genius and intelligence. Democratic socialist. Oh, my God. Pass the cognac. This is getting too much. Wes is starting to lie. Wes start lying. He's starting to lie. No, look it up in your Wikipedia. Look it up. Oh, so democratic socialism really means something very different than Soviet Union. It's different than Cuba. It's different in Venezuela. We can have independent arguments about Cubans, why they have first world diseases rather than third world diseases in terms of their health care. We can learn something from them. Absolutely. But when it comes to treatment of dissident voices, critique brought to bear. So you give them some sense of them having something to say, then pull the rug from under in terms of their lack of exposure or understanding of what it means. But then you're going to tell them the truth. Bernie Sanders is not running on a socialist platform. He's running on a left liberal FDR-inspired platform, you see. So that all this talk about him as a democratic socialist has to do with his courage of being honest about his own self-identity, not the content of the platform that he's running on. Then I tell him, I say, now if you really want to look at a democratic socialist, you're looking at one now. I said, oh, if I was running, it'd be much more socialist platform. But hold your horses, you don't have to worry about it. I'm with Bernie. I'm pushing this left liberal FDR-inspired platform. Then you go concrete. What are the ways in which public life has made a major contribution to the quality of life in the country? And you can start from the labor movement bringing us the weekend. You like to be off on Saturday and Sundays? Yes, I do. That was not a given, you know. People died for that. They thought that was a communist idea. You think taxing the rich in any way is a positive move? They thought that was a socialist idea in the 1910s when they passed that. So you give a sense of the history of the ways in which public life and public activity and government has been a force for good. On the other hand, though, you don't naively think that the government itself can't do wrong. Right? The government's tied to FBI and the CIA and COINTELPRO programs. The government's tied into a whole host of treatment of people all around the world in vicious ways. They overthrowing democratic governments in Iran and Dominican Republic and so forth and so on. That's extension of government too. That's where our anarchist brothers and sisters come in. Oh yeah, we gotta listen to Noam Chomsky and the others. Don't just have a critique of concentration of power in the private sector. When you do have concentrated power in the public sector, and we must have significant public presence, significant government, that same concentrated power can be used in an ugly way. So there has to be localized, decentralized forms of democratic coming together in self-management along with the government playing its appropriate role focused on poor and working people. That's the beginning of a conversation about what we mean when we talk about socialism.
Thank you for that. Lesson number 3. I have recently come under fire or critique for challenging the notion that the only way Democrats can be successful is through an incrementalist approach to politics, or what they call a pragmatic approach to politics. And by pragmatic, they mean, let's not be ambitious in our policy goals. Let's set policy goals we think the Republican opposition will be amenable to. And I find that fallacious in their thinking. So this is an argument that is going on amongst a lot of Democratic circles here in this state. They think the best chance for progress is piecemeal, are small incremental steps. They think that's the best electoral strategy. And of course, they're comparing this with the progressive movement, where we say, healthcare is a fundamental right, not a privilege, where we talk about the concentration of power in the gilded classes and among corporations. So how do you respond to this notion that the best way forward for Democrats, for the progressive movement, is through an incrementalist approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful formulation of that, but then again, and I just salute you for being an elected official who has that kind of fire and vision. See, it's one thing for me, to come from outside of the political system. I mean, I'm teaching at Harvard, so that's a ruling class site for formation of elites. So I'm part of a system, but I have a freedom that you don't necessarily have, because as being inside of the system, it's like when Bernie wins, you see. Oh, no, he's going to win. But when he wins, then all of a sudden now he's got institutional constraints. He's got a constraint of a system he's part of, you see. And so we've got to be willing to be sensitive, make sure he's accountable, put pressure to bear so that we create some kind of counter force against those dominant forces coming at him. And you have to deal with that every day.
Thank you for acknowledging
No, that's real. And in Iowa too, as a black man, you know, I'm praying for you, brother. No, but you do it with dignity. I know that. I know that. But in saying this, first, there's a difference between wrestling with the problematic and the catastrophic. I come from a tradition where my folk have been on intimate terms with catastrophe. See, slavery is not a problem. Jim Crow was not a problem. It was a catastrophe. That's like going to Europe and saying they got a Jewish problem. No, they ain't got a Jewish problem. They got catastrophes visited on Jews. Once you shift the catastrophic to the problematic, you have deodorized the discourse. And you have to keep it funky. And the funk has to do with the suffering, the struggling, the shuddering, and the resistance. You see. So when America has catastrophe, doesn't it go to the public sphere? War? What was 1939, 40, 41 about? Massive mobilization. The government playing a fundamental role. America went socialist for a while in terms of war production because you had a catastrophe. National security was at stake. The Civil War in the 19th century, massive government action because everything's at stake. Well, we're simply saying that for poor people and working people, they have catastrophes visited on them. They need intervention. And the same would be true in other parts of the world when the U.S. government intervenes. That's not a problem in the Middle East. It's not a problem in Latin America. It's not a problem in Vietnam in the 60s. It's a catastrophe. Now, when you look at the world through the lens of catastrophe, all of a sudden incrementalism becomes highly inadequate. Or another way of putting it is this way. You always notice how people have a different view of things when the catastrophe comes to their house and their neighborhood, whereas when it's visiting other people's house in other people's neighborhood, you got to move slowly. You have to be very gradual about this. You have to be very incremental. No, we're talking about my mama. You're talking about my brother, my friend. And I would hope I would have enough integrity and consistency to say, when it comes to your house, I want serious change too. I don't have to wait until it comes to my house to understand the catastrophe already being visited on my fellow human beings and in America on my fellow citizens. You see? So in that sense, it's a matter of pointing out the hypocrisy, deep hypocrisy. And Bernie says this better than any when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. You notice it when it comes to health care, when it comes to education, when it comes to job with a living wage, the fundamental question, who gonna pay for it? Who gonna pay for it? When it comes to wars, trillions and trillions of dollars paid for, nobody asked that question. Why? Because there's a common sense of catastrophe from the vantage point of those who rule. But for those who are ruled, when they say it's a catastrophe, move slowly. Very, very slow. We saw this, of course, in relation to Jim Crow. Well, I want to be progressive. I want to be the progressive version of Jim Crow. And I don't want change too quick. These black folk have been over here enslaved for 244 years under the U.S. Constitution for 89 years and 100 years of American terrorism and lynching, but they're supposed to move gradually and incrementally. You say, oh, I can see. You got truncated sensitivity. You haven't imagined and empathized enough of what it's like to be in their skin. And what would you do if they were in their skin? Well, if you claim to be a moral human being, you ought to be able to have a view of the world that embraces their catastrophe and be concerned about it. So even when we hear these centrists and moderates within the Democratic Party talking in that way, you see, you always get the sense of, ooh, they're a little too close to Wall Street. They really believe that the stock market is a measure of the quality of life in America rather than how everyday people, ordinary people living is a measure of what America's all about. What view do they have? And this is the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. And it's a hell of a wing. It really is. It's a hell of a wing. And it comes in all colors. It comes in all colors. I mean, all this talk about diversity, that's a bureaucratic construct of somebody who wants to deodorize the discourse. It's true. They want to make the class hierarchy just more colorful, so people ought to be satisfied. You got some women and some people of color at the top acting in a similar way. You ought to be satisfied. No. We believe in integrity, honesty, decency, moral consistency, no matter what color you are, no matter what gender you are, no matter what sexual orientation you are. We want to know what's the moral content of your identity. What are the political consequences of it? What kind of human being are you in terms of the virtues and values you enact in your vision and proposals? And we can do that without hating them. But ain't nothing wrong with what I call charitable Christian hatred. It's true, I learned it in Vacation Bible School. You hate the sin and still try to stay in contact with the humanity of the sinner. You hate the injustice. There's nothing wrong with hating domination, hating hatred itself, hating oppression, hating exploitation, and you ought to be willing to do something about it. But that doesn't mean you end up hating the rich. You hate the greed of too many of the rich. And some of the rich can commit class suicide. That's a beautiful thing to observe. Like one of the Vanderbilts, who joined the Communist Party. He really had tough Thanksgiving dinners with Cornelius and company.
This is beautiful. So I will get to our final lesson before we open it up for a few questions. You've supported Senator Sanders in 2016. Obviously, you're supporting the senator for president again. You're one of the most gifted thinkers in the world, and this presidential field is unprecedented in terms of its numbers of folks who are running, its diversity, and its high caliber of talent. How did you arrive at your second consecutive endorsement of the senator?
Oh, it was easy. And probably because the bar is so low. I mean, you got to be honest about it. You really got to be honest about it because, the Democratic Party has been unleashing these milquetoast neoliberal politicians for a long time. They really have. And they talk a good game when they come through in the caucus, and they talk a good game in the primary. And as soon as they get to White House, here come Wall Street, here comes the military-industrial complex, here comes business as usual as they give lovely speeches, but everyday people still suffering. And then we wonder why everyday people start looking for neo-fascist options and reactionary options and authoritarian populist options. They are suffering. They want somebody who will speak to that suffering, you see. And so in that sense, and again, I say this out of love for the other candidates for the most part. And Sister Elizabeth, she's not neoliberal in the traditional sense. She was a Republican until 1996. And I'm open to conversion. Very open to conversion. And she's, I have a great respect for the things that she has been saying recently and so forth. So she is willing to then ally herself with the non-corporate wing of the Democratic Party at the moment. We don't know. We don't know. I could be wrong. I could be right. You see? So when it comes to choices, given my own conception of the world, the only one who comes close would be Sister Elizabeth. But even when it comes to foreign policy, she's just so establishmentarian. And the problem is that, you see, the gangster in the White House pulled the rug from under the Republican establishment. Pulled the rug from under the party establishment completely. The Democratic establishment has been holding on for dear life. It almost went under in 2016. And I believe if they had treated my dear brother Bernie fair in the whole process, beginning from Iowa all the way to Philadelphia, he could have been the candidate. I really do. He could have been the candidate. And he and I had, a number of tensions, because we're supposed to have tension. Because you got to be jazz-like, right? You don't want just harmony. You want dissonance in your relationship. You see, so me and Bernie, we like to fight over things. It's a beautiful thing. You know what I mean? And I had told him, I said, man, I just think you should have made more noise in Philadelphia, brokered that convention, made sure to, no, we wanted unity. Well, but you really won. I said, well, I don't know, brother. Well, but, okay, so we can go back and forth. We can go back and forth. You see what I mean? And then when he came out with Sister Hillary, that was a choice that he made, and I can respect it and so forth. But I figured all he needed to say was, she's so much better than Trump. He didn't need to say, I think she's highly progressive. That's a lie. Don't lie to the people, brother. You know that's not true. He said, but I'm supporting her now. I know, but that's the difference between folk who had to deal with the electoral political system and those of us who just don't care about the consequences personally, right? She's better than Trump, period. Vote. That's all you can say. Much better than Trump. Very much better than Trump. But not that highly progressive. Still milquetoast neoliberal. Still tied to Wall Street. Still tied to military-industrial complex. Still tied to war profiteering. And not having the highest level of integrity in her career. They say, oh, Brother West, how can you say that about a woman? Because she's a human being. Every human being has accountability. I'd say exactly the same thing about a male. I'd say exactly the same thing about a non-binary precious person who had the same record. You see, consistency in that regard. Now, 2020, we jump ahead and say, okay, given the field, and Brother Pete, I can just talk, is it all right to talk about certain candidates?
Well, hey, look, you're Dr. Cornel
It's all right.
West.
It's all right.
You do.
It's all right to talk about certain candidates.
But I do want to give.
Maybe I'll pull back.
You got to be on the road. You got to be on the road.
Yeah, no, we got to run too.
And
though.
I do.
But
I do want to give.
But no, brother Pete. But Brother Pete is like family to me. His father was the great Joseph Buttigieg, who translated Antonio Gramsci. He was the dean of humanities at Notre Dame. And he was like a blood brother with me. We used to go to Italy every summer. And so I remember Pete when he was in diapers. I remember I gave him his first $5 bill right in his diaper. So I love that brother as family, you see. And so I see him, I give him a hug. I said, please give me a hug to Ann. Brother Joseph died a year ago and so forth. But I tell Pete up front, I said, now when it comes to the legacy of Gramsci, Brother Pete wrote his senior thesis on who? Does anybody know who he wrote it on? He wrote it on Brother Bernie as exemplar of integrity. He lived in my same room as a freshman at Harvard, Hallworthy 8. We lived in the same room, but 35 years difference, you see. So he's like family, but I'm just honest with him. I say, brother, now you know I can't support you. I love you to death. You're going to be a member of the family all, but you just part of that same milquetoast neoliberal crowd I've been critical of all this time. I can't support you, brother. Not at all. You see. Now, is he better than Trump? Of course he's better than Trump. All of y'all better than, the bar's about this low in terms of his own gangster activity in that regard. And when I say gangster, I'm not just name calling. I want people to know that. A gangster is an objective condition. You see, you grabbing woman's private parts, that's gangster. You see some oil in another country, you think you ought to have access to it, that's gangster. When you lie 55 times in 2 days, that's gangster. And there's a gangster inside of all of us. I won't say a Trump inside of us, that's too hard. But there's gangster inside of all of us, because we all have to wrestle with mendacity, hatred, domination, and so forth and so on. So when I call him that, I'm saying that in a Socratic way, not just a matter of name calling and finger pointing. That's very important to point out, because there's a difference between a gangster and a hypocrite. Right? Hypocrisy is the salute that vice pays to virtue. You know their standards, you fall short. A gangster has no standards at all. You see, just goes through the world, narcissistic, no accountability, with impunity. And it comes in various forms. We just happen to have one in the White House. You see. So then the question becomes, then how do we both win on the one hand and also remain true to our sense of vision and prudence? And when you mention that word pragmatism, it's very important, because pragmatism has been hijacked in the corporate media. Pragmatism once meant, with William James and John Dewey and Charles Sanders Peirce and Richard Rorty and others, it meant vision of an incomplete world that could be made better, almost like the tikkun olam of Judaism, making the world better. But pragmatism has come to mean opportunism. So when you read in the New York Times, so-and-so is pragmatic, they don't have John Dewey in mind. What they mean is incrementalists, opportunists, willing to do anything to win. That's different. That's a crude Machiavellianism. That's what that is. It's a crude Machiavellianism. And I hate to see the word pragmatism used in that way, because it's such a great philosophical tradition that has to do with the dignity and decency of everyday people. Brother, I'm sure, we doing all right?
We're a little close on time, so we're just going to open it up for
Absolutely.
a few questions.
Absolutely.
Keep it brief, please. We have a lot of events today.
First question, we'll go here. I saw this hand. Oh, we'll get you next.
Would you connect the Rainbow Coalition to the effort that we're doing today?
Oh, absolutely, my brother. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I saw my dear brother on TV yesterday, Brother Bakari Sellers, talking about Bernie Sanders' march with Martin Luther King Jr. and hasn't done anything since. You say, brother, you born in 1984. When you were born, Bernie was breaking his neck supporting Jesse Jackson in 1984, and there wasn't a whole lot of progressive white folk who were. He was there. He was there again in 88. Not because he wanted to be an ally with an interest group of black folk, because he wanted to be a person of integrity, honesty, and decency, concerned about poor and working people. That's why he was there. Howard Zinn was there. All of the towering, standing around was those who were concerned with creating a multiracial coalition that was bigger than each and every one of us, that had to do with the empowerment of poor and working people. And this very much is in that legacy. Now, I view it also part of the legacy of the later Martin Luther King Jr., even prior to the Rainbow Coalition, 1968. And we have to keep in mind, when Brother Martin was shot down like a dog, 72% of Americans disapproved of him, and 51% of black people disapproved of him, because he had a critique of the American empire, a critique of Vietnam. He said a Vietnamese baby has the same value as a white and black and brown and red and indigenous baby in America. That's not going to make you popular. And then when he brought all poor people together, a whole lot of folk got scared, including some black middle-class folk and black elites, even though it's much smaller than the white elites and the white middle class, you see. So this campaign and movement, I always use both words at the same time, is in this tradition. And it's a grand tradition. The trade unionists, the feminists, the womanists, the anti-homophobic, the anti-transphobic, the persons from the middle classes concerned not just about their own interests, but concerned about the interests of those who are less well off than them, and a few of the elites. We've got a slice of elites. I think some of them are in the closet. Some are in the closet, because they know when it comes to stability, you can't sustain the present status quo. You've got to have some kind of change and transformation.
Thank you both for being here. I'm trying to say this eloquently. I'm out knocking doors, and I'm very well aware of the privilege I have as a white woman. And the systematic oppression that we as working class people are pitted against each other. We're all the same, you know.
Absolutely.
My mom gets mad at people on food stamps, but yet, you know, her sister who has a $2 million home pays less taxes than her. And she really does not understand. She thinks that's the, you know, we just get pitted against each other. Unless you're educated, it's hard to understand that because you're too worried about surviving. My question is, as I'm knocking doors, I don't feel worthy of asking people of color, you know, to relate to me because I don't understand what that's been like. So, and to inspire them to come out on a cold night when they may have to ask for time off work. I mean, that's what I'm running into. People can't get off work, but it's a matter of, it's so important that how do I help them understand that ask for that time off work, ask for that babysitter, because what you can do in an hour and a half is going to make more of a difference.
No, I think that what you ended with is so crucial. That you tell them that it has to do with what the future of their own children, their own community, the nation, and the world, because this is the ecological crisis that we're talking about as well, right? Very much so. But the first part of your powerful question, though, I don't think you should, there's nothing wrong with having a certain anxiety about going up to a house on the chocolate side of town. But don't let that anxiety stop you. Because you see, the human relations are a very deep thing. And as soon as you open your heart and your mind and your soul and connect with theirs, it won't happen every time, because it doesn't happen every time on the vanilla side. But it won't happen every time. But when it does, all of a sudden, all that concern about race and so forth becomes secondary. You are there because you are bearing witness to a truth and a justice, and people are concerned about truth and justice in communities, no matter what color they are. So don't allow that to stop you at all, because one of the ways in which we are divided and conquered is precisely allowing any such anxiety to get in the way of our reaching out and connecting with one another. And so you just keep bearing witness to what you're doing. Absolutely, absolutely, very much so.
I hate to do this, but we have time for one more question. And I feel like it should come from this hemisphere of the room.
Well, we've got our dear sister here, too. Well, let's have just two more.
We got time for two more questions.
One on the right,
So
end up on the left.
We'll get back to the left side here.
All right, is that all right, though? Oh, this is the left. Oh, I love it.
Depends
I love
on
it.
which way you're pointing. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate being able to listen to you today. I have been working for the rights for Palestinians, equal rights for Palestinians, since I came back from the area in 2004. And I'm working with Bernie's campaign, and we're working with the Arab Muslim population in this city, and they're more than grateful for us to come out because no other campaign is meeting with them. And we really appreciate that. But we have a very liberal, progressive platform for Palestinian rights, including rights for BDS, and as you can hear, we have support here, even in this room. Rights for BDS and equal rights for Palestinians and Israelis. And I know I followed the snafu that happened at the platform committee nationally in 2016. Can you tell me what we can do to make that change? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, indeed, indeed. Well, you know, Brother James Zogby's been at this for a long, long time trying to, you know, Brother Zogby, though, he's a high-quality brother. And, I mean, we were just trying to get the Democratic Party to use the word occupation. I mean, this is not the most radical move now. Just trying to be honest about what a condition is and so forth. And we got tremendous backlash, both from Clinton as well as the Obama people there. But there was a stronger openness then than before. And the beautiful thing is the kind of awakening that's taking place among the younger generation. There's no doubt that there's a shift, and this includes especially the young Jewish brothers and sisters who are beginning now to call into question some of the lies told them by their parents and grandparents about the history from 48 all the way up to the present. I think it's no accident that it would be part of the great tradition of secular Jewish brothers and sisters coming out of Brooklyn, one of which went to Vermont, who at the highest level says a Palestinian baby has the same value as a Jewish baby in Tel Aviv. And a Jewish baby in Tel Aviv has the same value as a Palestinian baby in Gaza. And we're going to be deeply humanistic across the board. So the legacy of an Edward Said will make a difference, because by keeping track of the humanity of folk who are dominated, of folk who are occupied, and then wrestling with their voices in terms of how one goes about trying to transform that oppressive situation. And that's a hell of a battle in the United States in both parties. But there's been some significant breakthrough. And when it comes to BDS, I mean, Brother Bernie and I have talked about this, and he and I disagree, because I support it because I think it's a last-ditch effort of nonviolent sort coming from a desperate, precious people in very, very ugly conditions of occupation. And he argues that, in fact, he thinks that in the end, it makes it more difficult, and especially on the academic side, not to have the dialogues. And Chomsky also has been part of this conversation. He's been ambiguous on this as well on the academic side. So we just agreed to disagree on this. Now, it's not the kind of thing that, I talk about on television in regard to the Bernie campaign, but they know that I'm a Jesus-loving free black man. And if you ask me about my precious Palestinian brothers and sisters, I'm going to tell you what's in my heart, why I'm for PDS, why I think it's important. And then it's, oh, but your brother Bernie disagrees. Yes, he does. He's got a right to be wrong, too. Absolutely, but I could be wrong, too, but no, I don't think I am, but we work it out. But we come together on a whole host of other issues. But in terms, again, of the other candidates, the fact that you get this particular secular Jewish brother coming out of Brooklyn pushing this says something about a tradition of a legacy of Jerusalem secularized that says humanism holds across the board, including precious Palestinians whose plight and predicament has been misunderstood, misinterpreted, and their suffering downplayed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to know your thoughts on the announcement that Biden has the black vote and the union vote.
Yeah, I mean, the polls, again, but no, it's true that there is a very rich patronage system of neoliberal Democrats that has been tied to the black voters. And Obama's one of the great examples of it. And, Brother Biden's got this Obama halo over his head. So every time he gets in trouble, he can just invoke Obama and everybody's supposed to succumb and kowtow and bow down and so forth. Wait, what happened to the Socratic energy we're supposed to be concerned about? What about the questioning? Well, he won. Yes, he did. When Clinton won, too. Yes, neoliberals did win for a while. Look what they did with their victories. Did they deliver for poor people? Did they call for the elimination of poverty? Did they hit new Jim Crow? Did they keep in contact with the humanity of folk around various oppressed peoples around the world, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and so forth and so on? How many bombs did they drop? 26,172 bombs dropped in 2016, even with a peace prize. Hey, what's going on here? Brother West, you hating on Obama. No. I hate injustice. I hate injustice. I don't care who it comes from, no matter what color they are, you see. Would I support him over against McCain? I was born at night, but not last night. But the bar is so low, again, you see. So it's the truth-telling on one level, and then it's the wrestling with the circumstances in place, and how do we come to terms with it, with the various kind of coalitions and alliances that we can create, but with lifting our voices, no echoes. And voices means you're open to other voices. The dissonance goes all the way down. It's like a jazz orchestra. Everybody's raising their voices with tremendous tension, creative tension that escalates the quality of the collective performance. That's Mary Lou Williams' band right there. All of those democratic voices raised with a concern bigger than themselves. And so when you hear the trade unions, black folks still tied in the neoliberal space, you see there's much more critique that needs to be brought to bear. And Bernie is more and more pulling from folk. And of course, Bernie is leading among black folk under 35. And he's gaining among trade unions. If they really want to know the truth about the condition of the working class, Brother Biden is not going to be the politician that you opt for. Is he better than Trump? Of course, but that's not the only question. That's not the only question. But thank you all. You all stay strong. I salute each and every one of you in what you're doing. Stay strong in what you're doing. I can tell you that. Iowa City, yes. George P. Howard Jr., founder of the Black Lawyers right out of Iowa, working with Paul Robeson. We love y'all.